The door to my hotel room creaked open without a knock, and there she was, framed in the harsh midday light like a ghost I'd conjured from my unraveling thoughts. I froze mid-sob, mascara-streaked tissues clutched in my fist, the balcony doors flung wide to let in the salty Spanish wind that did nothing to dry my tears. "Lo siento," she whispered, but she didn't back away. Instead, she stepped inside, her eyes locking onto mine with a steadiness that pinned me in place, as if she'd seen 1,000 broken mornings like this one. I was Alina Harper, 28 years old, a freelance writer from Brooklyn who'd packed her regrets into a carry-on and fled across the Atlantic to the sun-baked coast of Catalonia. West Spain, or as the locals called it, the wild edge of the Costa Brava, seemed like the perfect place to disappear. Jagged cliffs plunged into the Mediterranean, villages clung to hillsides like forgotten prayers, and the air hummed with the kind of ancient rhythm that made you believe in reinvention. I'd rented a room at the Posada del Mar, a faded grand hotel in the fishing town of Cadax, the kind of place where Salvador Dali once wandered, chasing surreal dreams. It was off-season, the tourists gone, leaving the hotel half empty and echoing with the ghosts of summer laughter. My escape wasn't dramatic in the movies, no midnight train, no tearful airport goodbye. Just a quiet unraveling. Back home, I'd spent 5 years building a life with Marcus, my college sweetheart, the kind of guy who quoted Hemingway at dinner parties and made me laugh until my sides ached. We were the perfect New York couple. Rooftop barbecues, weekend hikes in the Catskills, vague talks of marriage that felt as inevitable as the seasons. But 6 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday, I came home early from a deadline crunch and found him in our bed with his assistant, some wide-eyed intern who'd probably never read a full novel in her life. The betrayal wasn't just the act. It was the way he'd looked at me afterward, not with shame, but with a casual pity, like I'd been the one who'd failed to keep things interesting. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just nodded, packed a bag, and sublet our apartment to a barista from the coffee shop downstairs. Then I booked the first flight to Barcelona, rented a beat-up Fiat, and drove north until the roads twisted into switchbacks and the sea turned that impossible shade of turquoise. Writing was supposed to save me. I'd come here to finish my novel, a sprawling thing about lost love and second chances, set against the backdrop of some fictional American heartland. Irony, right? But every time I sat down at the rickety desk by the window, the words curdled into fragments. Trust is a house of cards built on whispers and wind. That first morning, after the tears and the intrusion, I expected her to apologize profusely and flee. Housekeepers in places like this were invisible. After all, shadows slipping in with fresh towels and a faint scent of lemon polish. But Josephine, she introduced herself with a soft lilt, her English laced with the rolling Rs of her Catalan roots, did neither. She was in her mid-30s, I guessed, with auburn curls escaping her uniform's cap and green eyes that held the depth of olive groves after a storm. Sturdy, not in the frail way of magazine models, but like someone who'd carried heavy loads and heavier secrets. Instead of retreating, she closed the door softly behind her, set down her cart, and crossed the room in 3 deliberate steps. "You're not okay," she said, not as a question, but as a fact she'd known before stepping inside. Her voice was low, accented, wrapping around the words like sea foam. I wiped my face, mortified, but she just pulled a chair from the corner and sat, uninvited but not unwelcome. "I've cleaned this room for 12 years. I know when someone's running from something." I laughed, a brittle sound that cracked in my throat. "That obvious, huh?" She nodded, and for the first time in weeks I felt seen, not pitted, not fixed, but witnessed. We talked for an hour that morning, or rather I spilled while she listened. About Marcus, the apartment, the novel that mocked me from the page. She nodded at the right moments, her hands folded in her lap like she'd been waiting for this confession all along. When the lunch bell rang from the village square below, she stood, pressed a small tin of her abuela's almond cookies into my hand and said, "Eat. And tomorrow come down to the kitchen before shift. I'll make you real coffee, not this American drip." I didn't go the next day. Or the one after. Shame kept me barricaded, pounding out sentences that deleted themselves as fast as they appeared. But on the third morning, hunger for food, for company, drove me downstairs. The hotel's kitchen was a warren of tiled counters and copper pots, smelling of garlic and sea salt. Josephine was there, sleeves rolled up, grinding beans with a pestle that looked older than the building. She glanced up, no surprise in her eyes, and poured me a cup without a word. Black strong the way Spaniards drank it. A jolt to the soul. That became our ritual. Every dawn before the other staff arrived, I'd slip into the kitchen like a thief and we'd talk. Not always deep things. Sometimes it was the absurdity of Dolly's mustache, or how the Mistral winds could steal your laundry from the line. But Josephine had a way of peeling back layers, gentle as unwrapping a gift. She was born in Cadax, she told me, daughter of a fisherman and a seamstress who'd sewn uniforms for Franco soldiers back when Spain still whispered about civil wars. Her English came from American sailors who docked here in the 80s, chasing Hemingway's ghosts. She'd married young to a local boy named Carlos, who drove trucks to France and came home with stories of Paris lights. But 3 years ago he'd left, not for another woman, but for the bottle, vanishing into Barcelona's underbelly, leaving her with a daughter Sophia, now 7, and a heart stitched with invisible thread. I trusted him with everything, she said one morning, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. My dreams, my fears. And he took them like loose change. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes did, flickering to the window where the sea churned gray under clouds. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand. It was rough from years of scrubbing floors, warm from the stove's heat. In that touch something shifted, a spark unspoken but electric. Days blurred into weeks. I wrote more, the novel unfurling like a sail in the breeze. Chapters about women who rebuilt after storms, who found solace in the curve of a stranger's smile. And Josephine. She became the muse I hadn't known I needed. We'd walk the cliffs after her shift, Sophia skipping ahead with a basket of seashells. The girl was a whirlwind of braids and giggles, chattering about mermaids in the caves below. Josephine watched her with a fierce tenderness, the kind that made my chest ache with envy and longing. One evening as the sun dipped low, painting the water in strokes of fire, we sat on a bench overlooking the bay. Sophia had run off to chase crabs, leaving us in that rare pocket of quiet. Why Spain? Josephine asked, her shoulder brushing mine. I hesitated, then told her the truth, not just Marcus but the deeper fracture. How I'd always felt like a square peg in the world's round holes, how loving him had been safe, scripted but hollow. I think I've been afraid of what comes next, of wanting something real. She turned to me, her face soft in the twilight. Real scares us because it asks us to trust. Her hand found mine again, deliberate this time, fingers lacing through like roots seeking soil. My breath caught, the world narrowing to the salt on her skin, the steady beat of her pulse against mine. I leaned in, or maybe she did, and our lips met, tentative then sure, a kiss that tasted of olives and ocean, of all the unspoken hours between us. It wasn't fireworks, it was a hearth igniting, warm and inevitable. From there our mornings evolved. Stolen glances over coffee, her hand lingering on my back as I left the kitchen. Nights when Sophia slept at her abuela's, we'd meet on the beach, wrapped in blankets against the chill, sharing stories until the stars wheeled overhead. She taught me to dance the sardana in the village square, her laughter bubbling as I stumbled over steps older than America itself. I read her passages from my book, her head on my shoulder, her quiet beautiful, more validation than any agent's note. But trust, as she said, is fragile. It started with a letter, slipped under my door one gray afternoon. From Marcus. He'd found my itinerary, hacked my email, the bastard, and was coming to make things right. Panic clawed at me. I hadn't told Josephine everything, not the raw edges, how I'd questioned my desires for years, how Marcus's betrayal had cracked open a truth I'd buried, that women, their softness, their fire had always stirred something deeper in me. Now with her it bloomed, terrifying and true. I burned the letter in the sink, watching the flames lick the paper like accusations. But he came anyway, 2 days later, striding into the Posada del Mar like he owned the place, all pressed chinos and that disarming grin. I was in the lobby checking emails when he appeared. "Alina," he said, voice smooth as bourbon. "We need to talk." Josephine was behind the desk, polishing silverware, her eyes flicking to us like a storm gathering. I wanted to send him away, but old habits die hard. We stepped onto the terrace, the wind whipping my hair. He apologized, spun tales of therapy and regret, how he'd realized he was the fool, not me. "Come home," he urged. "This exile. It's not you." It wasn't the words. It was the pull, the gravity of 5 years yanking me back. I nodded, numb, and agreed to dinner that night in town. Neutral ground, I told myself. Closure. She knew the moment I returned to the kitchen. Who was that? Josephine asked, her hands still in soapy water. I lied, said an old friend, a complication from New York. Her face shuddered, that green-eyed steadiness fracturing. Alina, she said softly, trust isn't given in pieces. That night as I dressed for dinner, simple jeans, a blouse that felt like armor, guilt gnawed at me. Marcus waited in the dining room, charming the waiter with broken Spanish. We ate paella, talked of neutral things, the novel's progress, his new job. But his hand on mine across the table felt like chains. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. A text from Josephine. Sophia asks for you. We're at the cliffs. Come if you want truth. I left the check-in sign, fled into the night. The path to the cliffs was treacherous in the dark, lit only by moonlight and the distant glow of Kadaks. My heart hammered as I climbed, the sea roaring below like judgment. There they were, mother and daughter silhouetted against the stars, Sophia asleep in Josephine's lap, a blanket draped over them. Josephine looked up, her face a map of quiet hurt. He was my past, I said, breathless. But you're. God, you're my now. She stood, easing Sophia down, and faced me. The wind tore at us, but she didn't flinch. Then why hide him? Why let him pull you back? Tears stung my eyes. Because I'm scared. Scared you'll see me and run. Scared this us is too good too soon. The confession poured out. The doubts, the buried longings, how Marcus had been my shield against the unknown. Josephine listened, then stepped close, her hands cupping my face. I've been scared too. Carlos. He wasn't the only betrayal. There was someone before, a woman from Barcelona. She promised forever, then vanished when her family found out. Left me shattered, raising Sophia alone. I swore I'd never let anyone in again. Her words hung between us, raw and real. Then the storm broke, not in rain but in her kiss, fierce and forgiving, pulling me against her as the waves crashed approval. We held each other there, Sophia stirring softly in her dreams, the world vast and unforgiving below. Trust, I realized, wasn't absence of fear. It was choosing her anyway. But the real tempest brewed back at the hotel. Marcus, sensing my absence, had stormed the kitchen, demanding answers from the night staff. By morning, rumors swirled. Whispers of the American writer and the housekeeper, tangled in something scandalous. The owner, a stern widow who'd run the posada for decades, called Josephine in. This isn't that kind of place, she said, voice like cracking ice. Family reputation matters. Josephine didn't beg. She quit on the spot, dignity her armor. I've cleaned your floors, mopped your spills. But I won't mop up my own heart. She packed her things that afternoon, Sophia wide-eyed and clutching a stuffed octopus. I found them in the staff quarters, bags by the door. What now? I whispered, panic rising. She touched my cheek. Now we choose. Together. We drove south that evening, my Fiat groaning under the weight of two lives merging. Barcelona's lights beckoned. A city of secrets and reinvention. I sold the novel outline to an agent over frantic calls. Enough for a small flat in the Gothic quarter. Josephine found work at a cafe, her hands steady on espresso machines, while Sophia enrolled in school, her laughter echoing through our narrow halls. It wasn't perfect. Nights, Marcus's emails haunted my inbox. Please turning to barbs, accusations of phase and confusion. My family back home sent tentative notes, probing without understanding. And Josephine. Her scars surfaced in quiet moments, doubts whispering that I'd tire of the life we'd built. But we'd sit on our tiny balcony, overlooking the Ramblas, and talk it through raw, unfiltered, hands entwined. 1 year later, as spring bloomed in riots of bougainvillea, I finished the book. Not about lost love but found. 2 women, cliffs and kitchens, learning that trust is a daily vow, renewed with every dawn. We dedicated it to Sophia, who by then called me Alina Mommy, her small hand in mine as we walked the beach. In the end, it wasn't Spain that saved us, or America we'd left behind. It was each other, flawed, fierce, unbreakable. Trust, Josephine taught me, isn't a gift. It's a garden tended with tears and time. And in its bloom we found home. The flat in Barcelona smelled of fresh paint and possibility. But the first weeks were a tightrope walk over an abyss. Mornings started with the clatter of trams outside our window, Josephine brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead, while I hunched over my laptop, chasing deadlines that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Sophia adapted like a weed in cracked concrete, her school uniform crisp, her drawings of three-headed sea monsters papering our fridge. But beneath the routine, fissures ran deep. Josephine's new job at Café El Rinson was a far cry from the Posada's hushed elegance. It was a bohemian hole-in-the-wall in the Bourne district, walls plastered with faded bullfight posters and the air thick with cigarette smoke from patrons who'd ignored the bans. She worked doubles, her uniform a simple black apron over jeans, coming home with blisters on her feet and a weariness that etched lines around her eyes. "It's fine," she'd say when I asked, forcing a smile as she massaged her arches on the worn sofa. "Bills don't pay themselves." I nodded, guilt twisting like a knife. My freelance gigs, op-eds for lit mags, ghostwriting for tech bros, trickled in, but the novel's advance was a pittance, barely covering Sophia's tuition. Marcus had stopped emailing months ago. His silence a final slap, but his shadow lingered. I'd catch myself in mirrors wondering if I looked different now, less Brooklyn polished, more sun-kissed wanderer, or if it was all illusion, a costume for the woman I was pretending to be. One rainy Thursday the crack widened. I'd promised to pick Sophia up from school, but a last-minute edit request from my agent kept me glued to the screen. By the time I raced through the downpour, her teacher was waiting, arms crossed, Sophia huddled beside her with tear-streaked cheeks. "She thought you'd forgotten," the woman said in clipped Catalan, her gaze pitying. Sophia flung herself at me, sobbing into my coat. "You said you'd be there, Alina mommy. Like always." The drive home was a blur of apologies and hot chocolate promises. Josephine arrived later, drenched from the cafe's leaky awning, and found us baking cookies. Sophia's attempt at forgiveness, flour dusting her nose like snow. But Josephine's face hardened when I explained. "You work too much," she said quietly after Sophia was tucked in. We were in the kitchen, the tiny space forcing us close, elbows brushing over the sink. "This life. It's not what I pictured for her." Her words landed like stones. "What did you picture?" I shot back, defensive, the rain drumming accusation on the window. "The Posada? Scrubbing floors while I typed away in my room? This is us, Josephine, messy real." She turned away, scrubbing a pot that didn't need it. "Real? Or just another escape? You ran here from him, but what if you're running from this?" The unspoken hung heavy. From her, from us, from the permanence of 3 lives tangled like yarn. We didn't speak for 2 days. She slept on the couch, I in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling cracks that mapped my regrets. Sophia sensed it, her chatter turning tentative, her hugs lingering. On the 3rd morning, I woke to the smell of pain tomate, bread rubbed with tomato and oil, her peace offering. She was at the stove, apron tied high, green eyes wary. "I didn't mean to push," she said, sliding a plate over. "Sophia. She's my world. And you're becoming part of that. But trust me with the hard parts, Alina. Don't shoulder it all." I pulled her into my arms, the bread cooling between us. "I'm trying. God, I'm trying." That night, we walked the Gothic Quarters alleys, Sophia between us, her hands in ours. Street musicians played flamenco on guitars strung with dreams, and for a moment, the city cradled us. Ancient stones whispering that love, like history, endures the sieges. Summer brought a fragile thaw. My novel sold modestly, enough for a real editor and a reading tour in Madrid. Josephine surprised me with tickets, her cafe tips scraped together. "Go," she urged. "Write our story to the world." But as I boarded the train, doubt gnawed. Was this our story or mine alone? Madrid was a whirlwind. Bookstores with vaulted ceilings. Audiences leaning in as I read passages about cliffs and confessions. Critics called it a poignant queer odyssey. And for the first time I owned the label. Queer unapologetic. But on the 3rd night, in a dimly lit bar after a signing, an old acquaintance from New York appeared. Lila, a poet I'd known in grad school, all sharp wit and sharper cheekbones. We'd flirted once, years ago, over cheap wine and shared heartbreaks. "Alina Harper, the runaway," she teased, clinking glasses. "Heard you traded Manhattan for Mediterranean magic." Spiel. We talked until closing, her laughter pulling confessions from me like threads. Not betrayal, not exactly. Just the thrill of being seen as the woman I'd become, untethered. She kissed me goodbye on the cheek, lingering a beat too long, and I let it happen, heart racing with the echo of what-ifs. Back in Barcelona, guilt waited like a tide. Josephine was at the station, roses in hand, Sophia waving a sign. Welcome home, writer extraordinaire. Dinner was celebratory. Gazpacho chilled with summer's bite, stories of Sophia's school play. But in bed later, as her fingers traced my spine, I froze. Something's changed, she murmured, pulling back. What happened in Madrid? The truth tumbled out, halting. Lila, the kiss that wasn't, the temptation of old freedoms. Josephine sat up, the sheets pooling like spilled secrets. You think I'm trapping you? That this us, Sophia, is a cage. Her voice cracked, not with anger but sorrow. I gave you my heart, Alina. All of it. And you're still looking over your shoulder. I love you, I pleaded, reaching for her. It was nothing. A ghost. But ghosts have weight. She moved to her sister's for a week, taking Sophia, leaving the flat echoing with absence. I wandered the Ramblas alone, the human statues frozen in judgment, the flower stalls mocking my barren hands. Calls went unanswered, texts unread. In the quiet I confronted the mirror. Who was I without her? The Brooklyn girl who'd settled, or the woman brave enough for this? On the 7th day, I drove to her sister's in the hills outside the city, a whitewashed finca with goats bleating in the yard. Josephine was in the garden, kneeling in dirt, Sophia nearby planting marigolds. She looked up, earth under her nails, and for a heartbeat I thought she'd send me away. Instead she stood, brushing soil from her jeans. You came. I can't lose you. The words choked out raw. Lila was a mistake, a reminder of who I was, not who I want to be. With you it's scary because it's forever. But I choose it. Every day. Sophia tugged my hand, oblivious. Plant with us, Alina mommy. Mama says flowers need roots to grow tall. Josephine's eyes softened and she nodded, handing me a trowel. We knelt together, dirt cool and grounding, our shoulders touching. That night, over her sister's paella, we talked. Not accusations but fears laid bare. Her own ghosts. The Barcelona woman who'd left. The fear that love for her kind came with exile. We're both runners, she admitted. But maybe we can run together. We returned to the flat as a unit, stronger in the mending. Fall deepened, leaves turning gold in the Pyrenees foothills. I took on fewer gigs, more time for Sophia's recitals, for lazy Sundays where Josephine braided my hair and we dreamed of a house by the sea. Trust rebuilt brick by brick in the small acts. Her leaving cafe shifts early for my readings, me learning Catalan phrases to whisper in her ear. Yet winter whispered warnings. A letter arrived from Cadax, the Posada's owner, ill, offering Josephine her job back. With bonuses, it read. For old times. Temptation flickered. Stability, roots in the town she'd loved. What if we went? She mused one evening as snow dusted the balcony. Sophia could see the sea again. My stomach nodded. Barcelona was our fragile kingdom. Cadax a Pandora's box of memories. And us? The village tongues that wagged. I pressed. She sighed, folding the letter. No. Here is home. With you. But doubt seeded. I saw it in her distant stares, the way her laughter rang a touch hollow. One stormy night, as thunder rattled the windows, she confessed over mulled wine. The offer. It made me think. What if I'm holding you back? Your book took off because of Spain, but America calls. Family opportunities. You're not holding me, I insisted, but her eyes searched mine, probing for lies. The storm outside mirrored the one brewing. The pull of old worlds, the fear that love demanded sacrifice one couldn't afford. Climax came unbidden on Christmas Eve. We'd planned a quiet Noche Buena. Turin sweets, a tree strung with shells from Cadax. Sophia in a red dress, singing carols in broken English. But as we lit candles, a knock echoed, insistent, foreign. Marcus stood there, coat dusted with airport snow, eyes red-rimmed. I need to see you, he said, voice slurred with jet lag and something stronger. One last time. Josephine's face drained of color. Sophia shrank behind her. I'd told him our address in a weak moment months ago. A breadcrumb for closure I'd regretted instantly. Now here he was unraveling our peace. This isn't your place, I said, blocking the door. But he pushed past, words tumbling. Apologies laced with blame, how he'd read my book, seen himself as the villain, come to fix it. Fix us? The irony burned. Josephine gathered Sophia, herding her to the bedroom, but not before shooting me a look, betrayal pure and sharp. Marcus ranted on, oblivious. You left me for this? Some Spanish fling? Come home, Alina. Be who you were. The dam broke. I am home, I shouted, the first real roar I'd mustered in years. You broke me, Marcus. Not with her, but with your smallness. This, I gestured wildly, encompassing the flat, the woman in the next room. This is bigger than your regrets. He deflated, tears streaming. I loved you. Past tense, a knife twist. Security dragged him away eventually, called by a neighbor's alarm. But the damage lingered, acrid as smoke. Josephine emerged hours later, after Sophia slept. Why him? Why now? Her voice was whisper-thin, green eyes stormy. You let him in. After everything. I didn't mean. But she cut me off, tears spilling. Trust, Alina. You keep chipping away at it. First Lila, now this. How many ghosts before you let mine rest? We argued through the night, words like hail. My recklessness, her walls, the terror of building on sand. Dawn found us exhausted on the balcony, rain washing the streets below. I can't do half measures, she said finally, voice breaking. Love me fully or let me go. The choice crystallized, sharp as sea glass. Fully, I vowed, pulling her close. Always. Spring unfurled in Barcelona like a promise kept, petals carpeting the boulevards in defiant color. We marked the turning with small rituals. Picnics in Park Güell, where gaudiest mosaics mirrored our patched-together mosaic of a life. Josephine's laughter returned, fuller, laced with the ease of survivors. Sophia thrived, her school reports glowing with stars, her bedtime stories now tales of 3 heroines conquering dragons. Us reimagined. My second book brewed, this one a memoir of sorts. Cliffs of the heart, weaving our story into fiction's veil. Publishers clamored, but I paced myself, savoring the writing over the hustle. Josephine read drafts aloud to Sophia, her voice giving life to our words, turning pain into poetry. You're magic, I'd tell her, kissing flour from her cheek after a baking session. She'd blush, that sturdy frame softening, and murmur, we're magic. Yet scars like roots delve deep. Marcus's intrusion left echoes. Nights when Josephine bolted awake, convinced footsteps in the hall were his return. I'd hold her then, whispering assurances until her breathing steadied, our bodies a bulwark against the dark. And I? Therapy sessions via Zoom with a Brooklyn shrink unpacked my flight patterns, the way betrayal had wired me for escape. Trust isn't blind, she advised. It's chosen vigilance. Josephine joined one call, tentative, her hand in mine across the screen's divide. Progress inching. Summer swelled, hot and honeyed. We escaped to the Costa Brava, not Cadax, but a quieter cove near Taça de Mar, where cliffs gentled into sandy bays. Rented a cottage with peeling blue shutters, the sea lapping at our doorstep. Sophia built sandcastles crowned with seashells. Josephine and I lounged on towels, books forgotten as we traced patterns in each other's palms. One afternoon as Sophia napped, we hiked a trail to a hidden grotto, the path narrow, wild thyme scenting the air. There, in the cool shade where sunlight dappled the water like scattered coins, Josephine stopped. Remember our first kiss? She asked, voice soft against the echo of waves. I nodded, throat tight. On those cliffs, wind howling like it wanted to steal us away. She turned, green eyes locking mine. I was terrified then. Still am sometimes. But you make me brave. From her pocket she drew a small box, velvet, worn. Inside 2 rings. Simple silver bands etched with waves. Bought with overtime from the cafe. Not marriage, not yet. The world's not always kind to us. But a promise. To trust, to stay, to build. Tears blurred my vision. I slipped the ring on, its cool weight a vow. Yes, I whispered, kissing her fiercely, the grotto sealing our words in stone. Sophia found us later, giggling at our sandy embraces, and we told her, gently in her language of stories, that family was a circle unbreakable. Back in the city, life deepened its hold. Josephine's sister visited, bearing baskets of figs and cautious approval. You look happy, she told her, hugging tight. My parents called from Connecticut, voices thawing from polite distance to curious warmth. When do we meet her? Mom asked after I shared photos. And the little one? Healing layered as pillow. Autumn brought challenges as seasons do. The cafe closed for renovations, leaving Josephine adrift. Job hunts yielded rejections, too qualified or not enough for the tourist traps. Tension simmered. Money tightened, arguments flared over budgets and burdens. I feel useless, she confessed one night, staring at the ceiling. Like I'm dragging us down. You're not, I countered fierce. You're the anchor. To prove it, I pitched a wild idea. Her recipes, her stories in a cookbook tied to my next tour. Tastes of Trust. A Catalan-American journey. She balked. I'm no writer. But I persisted, typing as she dictated. Abuela's cookies, fisherman's stew. The almond cakes that had bridged our worlds. Publisher's bit. Seeing the hook. Queer love through food's lens. We co-authored it. Nights filled with laughter and spills. Sophia taste testing with puckered faces. Release day dawned crisp. A launch at a Bourne bookstore packed with locals and expats. Josephine read first, voice steady. Eyes shining as applause rippled. To the women who clean up messes, she toasted. And the ones who help make them beautiful. Winter wrapped us gently that year. Christmas without ghosts. A tree adorned with Sophia's crafts, carols sung off-key. Marcus faded to a footnote. His life a distant hum via mutual friends. Remarried, they said, to the intern. No matter. Our circle held. As the new year crested, we stood on the balcony. Fireworks blooming over the harbor. Sophia, now 8, leaned against Josephine, yawning. What's trust mean, Mama? She asked, innocent. Josephine knelt, drawing us close. It's like this, she said, linking our hands. Holding on, even when the wind blows. I watched them, my heart full to bursting. From that hotel room intrusion to this. A family forged in fire, tempered by time. Spain hadn't been escape, it was arrival. Josephine, with her steady hands and storm-deep eyes, hadn't just surprised me. She'd remade me. Teaching that trust blooms in the vulnerable spaces, where betrayal once carved hollows. And in those blooms we thrived, human, flawed, eternally linked. The meaning? Simple, profound. It's not in the grand gestures, but the quiet choices day after dawn to stay.